Hello, St. Andrew Christian Church. It's Reverend Chris Wilson. And this little video today is to do some highlights of the General Assembly that just happened for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ at the end of July, first part of August. We did a presentation in Adult Ed this last week, but for those that weren't able to go, wanted to share some highlights of the assembly and some things that happened. Some kind of start out. It simply happens every 2 years. It's a way for Disciples of Christ congregations and all the supportive ministries to gather, to worship, to resource, to educate, to plan, to connect. All those things are so vital for us to stay more connected and more united as a movement. So it's meaningful to be able to attend and go. St. Andrew is pleased to have, I think you may be glad to know, we had 13 people attend. We had 5 adults, including myself, and then we had 8 youth attend. So we had 13 from our church at the assembly, which I think is great to have that many people in attendance. Chuck was really excited to take the youth group. In lieu of a normal mission trip, they got to be a part of the assembly experience. There were some particular youth things they did. One of the youth activities, they did a justice walking tour around near downtown Louisville, which was meaningful for them to do. They get to be a part of our worship services, the business sessions. A few of them attended workshops. All that was really important for our youth and our youth sponsors to help facilitate and be a part of. It's a meaningful thing to be connected and to visibly feel the wider movement that we're a part of beyond the local congregational level. And so it's just really great that our young people and all 13 of us got to experience the church in that kind of way. So I'll highlight the video with a few things. First, I'll start with worship. Each night there was a worship service, had a different preacher each night that gave an inspiring message. The worship services were diverse and inclusive with people from different ages and backgrounds and orientations and gender diversity and languages and race. And it allowed people that went to the assembly, and particularly to the worship services, to see the breadth and the width of who we are as disciples. There is a wonderful tapestry of who we are as disciples when we worship together. It's a powerful thing to have 3,300 people singing together, worshiping together, responding together. It's really meaningful to do that. Probably one of the highlights for our whole group was on Sunday morning. We all went to Beargrass Christian Church, one of the local churches there in Louisville, Kentucky. And preachers come in and from various places in the country and preach at local churches. We were fortunate to hear William Barber, who runs and co-leads the Poor People's Campaign. And my goodness, did he share an inspiring message. And I think all 13 of us were at that service in one form or another. Jackson Seitz mentioned on Sunday that for him to go to that sermon, the word that he used was magical. Very justice-oriented, inspiring, calling people to action and being rooted in the work and doing the work together. It was just a powerful experience to be on the listening side, but the active listening side of hearing William Barber give the message that morning was really one of the highlights of the assembly. And so worship was a big part of our time at the assembly. Another component that was important was the resolutions that were brought forth to the assembly. And some of them were resolutions that were of a social justice nature, and some were operational. So I'll just highlight a few of the social justice resolutions. The first was an emergency resolution, and you'll be pleased to know that myself and St. Andrew got to be a part of that resolution. St. Andrew's name was attached to the resolution. It was a resolution in support of our trans and gender diverse community. It was a resolution that was speaking against all the anti-trans and gender diverse legislation that's been sweeping the country over the last 2 years, and in particular in the last few months. Many of those legislative actions had been moving into action in terms of being enforced. And just an onslaught of abuse and trauma to our trans and gender diverse community. And for our church to be a part of that, to actually sign on that resolution as a congregation, and for it to pass was really powerful. That resolution, the uniqueness of this resolution passing is that when votes were taken to vote in favor of the resolution, just almost a powerful yes to support the resolution. When it came time to speak no to the resolution, not a single voice said no. There was this justice silence as we were able to speak as a denominational body against this kind of negative legislation happening around our country, and to stand in solidarity with our trans and gender diverse community. So probably one of the top highlights for me in terms of the social justice resolutions that was presented and passed at the Assembly. A second, kind of a close second in terms of social justice, was a resolution that was calling and naming the negative impact of Christian nationalism in our country, and was to advocate for churches to speak against it, to educate ourselves around Christian nationalism, and to speak out as a body or as individuals against this kind of rhetoric and way of believing. And it passed by a super majority. Only a few people voted against that, and some of that was people's own sense of definition of what Christian nationalism was, though I would argue that the definition has pretty much been set, and the agenda of Christian nationalism is pretty pervasive around our country. It's something we as a church and a wider church need to be speaking against, and it was great joy that that passed without any problem. Another social justice resolution was dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and calling on Israel and those supported bodies to speak to the injustice of the poor treatment of the Palestinians, and in many cases almost unjust treatment of Palestinians in that conflict, and is calling out the enforcement of international law where it's not being enacted or followed in particular ways. And that resolution also passed. There was a resolution that was brought forth. The resolution essentially was just calling on the formation of a council or a group to look at just the generational damage that has been incurred on our indigenous neighbors in this country. Stolen land, absconded land, and this particular council or group, the resolution passed for this group was to explore ways for churches to be more educated about that, as well as looking at possible doable forms of reparations to the indigenous community of this country. And so that passed, and we will look forward to the work that that committee and that group does in terms of information back to the church. It doesn't mean we can't continue to do work ourselves, but our denomination is particularly tasked to work on this as a wider body and encouraging churches to do the same. The last resolution that I'll speak to of a social justice nature had to do with food waste and the proper disposal of food waste. And we as a church are already doing much of this, not wanting food waste to appear in water systems and landfills. And our own SAGE group has already done a fantastic job of re-upping not only our recycling efforts, but our food waste efforts on Sunday morning. In the kitchen, you'll find a special container just for food waste. We separate out a container for our coffee grounds and just all those things to separate out in different ways so that stuff does not end up in landfills or in our water systems, and grateful for the work we're doing in that past. On the operational side in the Assembly, we had Terry Hord Owens, our General Minister and President, was re-elected to a second term, so that was exciting. That was a big thing that we decided on to approve her. She's doing a great job and will continue to do good work in representing who we are as disciples to the wider context. The other operational resolutions was after this next General Assembly is going to be in 2025. We typically do them every 2 years. We had a resolution that passed that starting after 2025, assemblies will happen every 3 years. And the 2 years in between will be virtual assemblies. And then every third year will be an in-person assembly. And that's a big change for us as disciples. There's a little bit of finances in that, but also a little bit of nimbleness in terms of how we define assembly and how we operate as assembly. And so that's a good thing. Along with that, starting in 2025, each church will have delegates that will represent the church so they can participate both in the online and the in-person assemblies as they are able to. And then the general board of our denomination, there was a resolution to reduce the size of the board for a sense of financial, fiscal responsibility and a better representation of groups to the board. So that happened. So all that happened with just some of the resolution work of the assembly. Workshops, we had some people attend workshops. I was honored to lead a anti-racism workshop. It was a 2-part workshop. It was a level 2 anti-racism training. Level 1 training is essentially about education, and level 2 is moving from education to action. I co-led that workshop with a black pastor from Texas. It was an honor to be a part of that, and we all, not in addition to the anti-racism work that we shared in that workshop, we were able to introduce a new initiative for congregations to have a step-by-step process of how to be identified as an anti-racist congregation. So that was all very exciting work to be a part of that and to represent the church and be a part of reconciliation ministry in widening not only the education, but feet on the ground, hands in the community, doing racial justice work and encouraging pastors and people to be a part of that work on an ongoing basis. Other than that, the assembly is about networking and relationship building and connecting and being joyful with one another, and we had plenty of time to do that. So in summary, the assembly was a great experience in Louisville, Kentucky. And those of us that went from the church were honored to go, to represent, to vote where needed, and to add to the energy and the excitement of being together as disciples. As I said, there was a little over 3,000 disciples from the United States and Canada that were there. We had some of our global mission partners that were there from around the world that came and were part of the assembly. It was a great time to be together, to be a wider church family, and to be disciples together. So that's a little bit of the summary, and hope that's helpful. And feel free to reach out to me if you have additional questions or things you'd like to know about the assembly. But that's kind of a summary report, so all of you can know a little bit more of what went on, and glad to share more if you want that. So hopefully we'll be able to do this again in 2 years and share a little more, and maybe encourage you to go and attend to be a part of that experience. So thanks for listening and listening more about our assembly in Louisville, Kentucky.